My name is Melanie Dunne. I'm a continental philosopher, and I am going to just read my paper on Immanuel Kant, where I focus on his third critique. The title is "Fine Art is a Living Phenomenon Determined by the Purposiveness of Nature." Fine art, Sean Kuntz, contains a determination that arranges itself in accordance to the purposiveness of nature in Immanuel Kant's 1724 to 1804 philosophy. This implies that fine art is a living phenomenon, having a life of its own beyond its initial creation. In the Critique of Judgment, 1790, Kant states that our aesthetic appreciation lies in the faculty of reflective judgment. What Kant incorporates into the third critique is that reflective judgment allows for the creation of new meaning in the face of the beautiful, the sublime and fine art. This paper will start off by examining how Kant had previously set up the regulative ideal in his architectonic system, which runs throughout his late philosophy. The purpose of this paper will be to show how Kant brings about a genuine unity between freedom and nature. This unity allows for the requisites of fine art to synthesize with the purposiveness of nature. Kant extends this regulative in the third critique to show how judgment allows for new concepts that were previously unconceived by the understanding. In analysis of the requisites of fine art, we will discover how the rules of reason harmonise and evolve through genius to originality. Immanuel Kant transcends the thinking of his time. According to Harris, it was Kant's aptitude of seeing in by totalities that pointed German Romantic philosophers towards new and exciting theories of knowledge. Kant continues to inspire philosophers and artists alike 2 centuries later. Indeed, it would be challenging to write about art or beauty at all in continental philosophy without referring to Kant's genius. Kant's philosophy from 1781, when he composed the Critique of Pure Reason, 1781 to 87, until his Critique of Judgment, 1790, can be read as a complex and intertwining system. Within this system, there is a coherent unity that postulates the inherent notion of movement. In the first critique, Kant defines the human experience of reason through the intuitions and understanding. Kant's transcendental deduction in the Critique of Pure Reason showed that a conceptual framework is necessary for experience itself. The requirements for the knowledge of phenomenon necessitate a priori categories as the enabling conditions of all human understanding. Objects in the external world are processed through the intuitions of time and space. They are then accorded under the categories of the understanding. O'Shea explains that the faculty of understanding subsumes given sensory intuitions under the categories in various judgments about appearances, thus unifying cognition through mediating concepts. Experience and understanding collectively constitute the foundations of all knowledge. O'Shea shows that the first critique determined the legislative domains of the understanding and practical reason for different territories, where, quote, there is an immense gulf between the domains of freedom and nature, and neither one can cognise its objects as the thing in itself. Given the demonstrations of the limits of reason, Kant wants to establish the nature and scope of empirical knowledge, this time to include aesthetic ideals. Kant first introduced his intellectual structure of the architectonic system in the Critique of Pure Reason, henceforth CPR. At A832, B860, Kant explains, quote, by architectonic, I understand the art of constructing systems, end quote, driven by internal correspondence and theoretical movement. These systems strive towards the ambitious unity of the determination of nature and the freedom of the mind. Or, as Kant said in CPR, quote, "The highest formal unity that alone rests on concepts of reason is the purpose unity of all things." A 686, B 714. Kant had indicated to this evolving concept in his 1784 article, "What is Enlightenment?" Quote, "Enlightenment is the emergence of man from a self-incurred immaturity." End quote. However, the notion of progressive movement does not reach full maturity until the third critique. Kant makes a major claim in the Critique of Practical Reason when he stated, quote, "Two things have always filled me with awe, the starry heavens above and the moral laws within." Kant, 1788. In the CPR, Kant's system is so perfectly organised. It leaves little room for him to adequately answer why reason is sometimes completely thrown by the perfect harmony or chaos, awe, that reigns in the heavens above and within the human heart. Kant proceeds to ask, quote, "How is a judgment possible which, merely from one's own feeling of pleasure in an object, independent of its concept, judges this pleasure as attached to the representation of the same object in every other subject, and does so a priori, i.e., without having to wait for the assent of others?" CJ, section 36. This question cannot be answered by objective knowledge within the limits of reason alone. By addressing the disorder and chaotic sublime in contrast to the organised, harmonious beauty, Kant allows for such possibilities of judgment merely from one's own feeling. Kant does this by incorporating the faculty of reflective judgment into the architectonic system of the third critique. In the Critique of Judgment, henceforth CJ, Kant formulates his architectonic system to unify his notions of theoretical and practical reason. The judgments of aesthetics are initially discussed in the introduction to the CJ. In adding aesthetic reflective judgment to this architectonic project, Kant is enabling systematic unity within his philosophy. The faculty of aesthetic judgment is a mediating concept unifying cognition between our other two conceptual faculties, reason and understanding. Kant had evolved this from his Prolegomena, 1783. Concepts of judgments of perception, subjective, and judgments of experience, objective, when he explained, quote, "When the sun shines on the stone, it grows warm. This judgment, however often I and others may perceive it, is merely a judgment of perception and contains no necessity. Perceptions are only usually conjoined in this manner. But if I say, the sun warms the stone, I add the perception of a concept of the understanding, i.e., that of cause, which necessarily connects with the concept of sunshine, that of heat. And the synthetic judgment becomes necessity universally valid, viz. Objective, and is converted from a perception into experience." Kant, 1912. O'Shea clarifies that in this instance we are, quote, "looking to find an appropriate empirical concept or empirical law that fits the particulars, and we are consequently interested in being able to synthesize our empirical kinds and laws in each given representation. With the introduction of the faculty of judgment, quote, nature is made for the carving, and it is even now partially revealing to us its own multi-levelled, indefinitely complex yet well-organised structure of empirical joints," O'Shea illuminates. In the Critique of Judgment, Kant specifies the unique concept of reflective judgment that seeks for particulars. Reflective judgment is contrasted to determinate judgment, which subsumes a particular under a concept that is already given in cognition. As humans seek to organise their experience under an empirical law, there are profound moments when we are given an experience or an object that we have no prior knowledge or understanding of. In these instances, determinate judgment has no concept under which it can subsume the material. Hence, reflective judgment, subjective and untaught by empiricism, is called to intervene between the determination of nature and human freedom to try and create a possible meaning. Reflective judgments do not require concepts that satisfy the categories of the transcendental reduction. For reflective judgment to withstand a critical analysis, it must be universal and therefore a priori. For Kant, beauty within nature and fine art is the expression of the aesthetic ideals. CJ section 51. It is the reflective judgment of the subjective perception attached to the representation of object that allows aesthetic ideals to be intuited as the beautiful or the sublime. In other words, there is no meaning given until it is given by the individual seeing or experiencing the phenomenon. Beauty is not contained within the object itself, but within the individual who encounters it. Because beauty lies in the subject and not the object, admiration of the aesthetic ideals can be compared to agape, or the Greek love of soul. Agape is a type of affection that requests nothing from the object, not even an explanation to what it means or why it exists. Kant states aesthetic ideals are a purposeless purpose. They are ends in themselves. There are many philosophers and poets who have tried to sum up this purposeless purpose. But I like a line by Angelus Celius: "A rose is without why. It blooms simply because it blooms." In Kant's analytic of the beautiful, beauty is considered under 4 categories of the architectonic system. These are quality, quantity, relation and modality. Through this analytic, Kant raises beauty above mere pleasure and the good. Pleasure is subjective and seeks gratification. Therefore, it can never be empirically objective. In this way, pleasure avoids classification under the categories, but will never attain the beauty of the status of beauty. An example of this subjective pleasure is that I may consider my young child's drawing to be a masterpiece, but it is highly unlikely that anyone else will perceive it in the same manner. The good has a purpose and is subsumed quickly under the categories of the understanding by determinate judgment. For example, through the ages, churches and states have commissioned many works that are considered in the realm of beauty. However, many of these works have been rejected because they fail to portray a good or moral, dependent beauty whose purpose is to deliver a stable message. The sublime is also distinguished from the beautiful. Kant postulates 2 states within the sublime: the dynamical, quality, and the mathematical, quantity, sublime. The sublime is wild and chaotic, creating a disharmony between imagination and understanding. The sublime is never a threat of imminent danger, just a feeling of being overwhelmed as determinate judgment fails to find a concept for this new experience. As with the beautiful, the idiosyncratic perception of the sublime is not in the phenomenon but within the subject who encounters it. Kant asserts that reason allows us to regain a position independent of our initial awe and panic in the face of the sublime. Having briefly described judgment in relation to the beautiful and the sublime, this paper will consider how Kant reinforces reflective judgment by linking the relation of the purposiveness of nature to fine art. In the first critique, Kant spoke about phenomenon in the world as conceived by the mind only. However, in the third critique, Kant has opened to nature as presenting a teleology which has a unique form of causality that the understanding is not equipped to determine. Through the concept of the purposiveness of nature, Kant explains, quote, "We present nature as if an understanding contained the basis of the unity of what is divisive in nature's empirical laws," end quote, CJ section 181. Nature's purposiveness is self-generating, spontaneous and unprompted, which does not require external stimulus. The dynamics of the purposiveness of nature makes it seem as if notions of theological destiny are embodied within its objects. These are analogies of the mind. Human will can harmonise with and be unified with the apparent determinism of nature. Kant explains, quote, "In thinking of nature as harmonising, in the diversity of its particular laws, with our need to find universal principles for them, we must, as far as our insight goes, judge this harmony as contingent, yet as also indispensable for the needs of our understanding, hence as a purposiveness by which nature harmonises with our aim, through only in so far as this directed to cognition." CJ 187. Harmony and purposiveness of nature is exhibited within the movement of original fine art as an a priori principle of reflective judgment. We know from the first critique that, quote, "the understanding is itself the source of the laws of nature." And that's at A 127 and B 163-65. As such, for us to engage with art, there must be necessary enabling conditions, as Kant tells us that every art presupposes rule, CJ 46. However, in Kant's postulate of fine art, the rules unify and evolve. It is through the process of becoming original that fine art, produced in accordance with design, becomes its own ultimate purpose. In his article, Kant's Conception of Fine Art, Goya explains the nature of fine art. Quote, "Kant's conception of nature of fine art and critical responses to it is essentially complex. And Kant recognises as the conjoint aspects of art precisely those elements which later aesthetic theories have portrayed as the unique essence of art. An analysis of that conception is offered, aimed at displaying its essential fruitful complexity." Goyer, 1994. Fine art is permeated with a subjective purposiveness of nature, as both are intimately connected in the final piece. It is through the medium of reflective judgment the artist allows the work to create its own meaning. O'Shea emphasises that, quote, "Kant continuously stresses judgment's regulative principle of nature, systematic and purpose unity is one through which we do not actually cognise anything. The faculty of reflective judgment allows Kant to sustain a consistency of philosophy about the beautiful, the sublime and fine art outside of the understanding. Kant replaced fine art in the realm of pure reason alongside God, freedom and immortality." In the third critique, freedom within fine art is undetermined reason. Kant tells us that this is when the cognitive faculties of imagination, understanding, soul and taste synchronise. The harmony enables a transcendence to produce an original aesthetic ideal, CJ section 51. It is the original aesthetic ideal that contains the dynamic movement that allows it to be upheld as a subjective universality throughout millennia. Through reflective judgment, it is the individual who gives subjective meaning to the aesthetic phenomenon. but it is held in comparable regard universally. The details of the requisites of the creation of fine art are now to be analysed. In the first critique, Kant explains, quote, imagination is the faculty for representing an object even without its presence in intuition. And that's CPR B151. Kant describes how imagination as a faculty of the cognition is a powerful agent for creating, as it were, a second nature out of the material supplied to it by actual nature. CJ section 49. Fine art is created out of the free play of the imagination. Drawing on the faculties of soul, understanding and taste, this free play of the imagination allows the reflective judgment to seek out particulars from the dynamic structure of empirical connections. The artist has a quasi-conceived notion of the overall aim of the finished piece of art, but the artist allows the piece to evolve in a way that the artist does not explicitly determine. In allowing for the free play of the concepts and the intuitions, a crowd of sensations and secondary representations are generated. CJ section 49. It is in this interaction of faculties, sensations and representations that genius comes into play in the production of the final piece. Kant defines genius as the exemplary originality of the natural endowments of an individual in the free employment of his cognitive faculties. CJ section 49. Genius, however, is somewhat subjective in Kant's architectonic system. Kant says that genius is a gift bestowed on an individual by nature. This bestowing by nature is done with the aim of its own purposive ends. Kant also argues for the free play in the creative effort to be successful. The artists must first be academically accomplished in their area. In other words, they must begin by following the tradition of their training and then break free from it when they are sufficiently confident in doing so. For the individual artist to advance from the constraints of their conventional academic field, there is a required Kierkegaardian leap of faith. In my summation, it is this leap of faith that pushes beyond the regulative ideal to genius. Ironically, Kant could not have described genius if he himself had no experience of this productive faculty within his own philosophical writing. As always, Kant tries to narrow down the specifics by explaining what it is not. In this case, Kant states that scientific pursuits are immediately ruled out of fine art and genius. The reason Kant gives is that the process of scientific discovery is not conducive to the rules of fine art, as they can be followed and reiterated in a step-by-step guide. Kant also makes very definitive distinctions between objects or crafts that are produced mechanically for their own completion and those pertaining to fine art, where the mechanisms can never be repeated. Objects of fine art are imbued with genius, creating their own rules, bestowing to the ideal of systematicity. Kant asserts this notion when he states, quote, genius is that by which nature gives the rules to art. When this occurs in an original piece of work, the, quote, author owes a product to his genius. He does not himself know how the ideas for it entered into his head, nor has he it in his power to invent the like at pleasure or methodically and communicate the same to others in such precepts as would put them in a position to produce similar projects. End quote, CJ section 46. What Kant is stating here is that genius works to combine and transcend regular cognition in the instant of creation that is so complex and unique to the moment that it cannot be recreated under any circumstances. It is the element of genius and an act of productivity that creates a movement of continual flux within the final piece. Quote, for what we entitle soul, everything is in continual flux, Kant asserts, CPR A381. In the first critique, soul, described as guiding thread of inner experience at A672, B700, soul is imperative to the process in the production of fine art. Fine art is self-maintaining, notably due to the faculty of soul in Kant's aesthetic theory. Kant clarifies what he means here by soul. Quote, soul, or Geist, in an aesthetical sense, signifies the animating principle in the mind, but that whereby this principle animates the psychic substance, or stele, the material which it employs for that purpose, is that which sets the mental powers into a swing that is final, i.e., into a play which is self-maintaining and which strengthens those powers for such activity. CJ section 49. Soul, plays, dance, intertwines with the potent instrument of the free imagination as ideas in creative process. The consummate expression of soul, born in the particulars of an aesthetic ideal, lives on after its completion. However, for Kant, a work of fine art is not born of the free play of the imagination or soul or genius alone. Fine art exhibits an aesthetic ideal insofar as it succeeds in giving sensible form to a rational idea. The poet, artist, philosopher, musician, etc. has a purpose or rational idea that they set about producing in accordance with design, an important element for Kant. Kant explains, quote, the poet essays the task of interpreting to sense the rational ideas of invisible things, beings, as to things of which examples occur in experience, example death, envy, and all of the vices, and also love. Transgressing the limits of experience, he attempts to aid of an imagination which emulates the display of reason in its attainment of a maximum. The body to body the fort to sense with a completeness of which nature affords no parallel. CJ section 1549. The understanding continually reports to the mind during the creative process because, quote, without understanding no object would be thought. CPR B75. The understanding plays a highly active role in synthesizing and harmonizing the faculties of imagination, soul, and the productivity of genius. Within the process of fine art, new concepts evolve and rearrange with intense vigor. What is particularly impressive is how the understanding continually reports to the mind during the creative process because without understanding no object would be thought, end quote. That's CPR B75. The understanding plays a highly active role in synthesizing and harmonizing faculties of imagination, soul, and the productivity of genius. Within the process of fine art, new concepts evolve and rearrange with intense vigor. What is particularly impressive is how the understanding can expand to create these new concepts on the demands of both free will and the determination of nature. Although Kant's theory of fine art has inspired countless people and will continue to inspire, he has faced much applaud and equal criticism. Kant believed that many critics are comparing different kinds of beauty. Also, Kant has been too vague on taste, basically saying it becomes more refined the more we encounter genuine beauty. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant states that, quote, complete purposive unity constitutes what is, in the absolute sense, perfection. A695 B723. Goyer in Reason and Reflective Judgment, Kant on the significance of systematicity, asks why Kant reassigned the regulative ideal of systematicity to the newly introduced faculty of reflective judgment. Goyer, 1990. From my standpoint, Kant has not reassigned anything, only expanded the regulative ideal of systematicity to include the ideal of beauty to the realm of pure reason. Therefore, the purposiveness of nature arranges itself in fine art. Fine art is an a priori living phenomenon extending its initial creation and an end in itself. When we are confronted with an aesthetic ideal, it is our reflective judgment mediating between reason and understanding that can identify with the exemplified movement of soul and genius within the work, in music, art, poetry, etc. Again, although we do not actually cognize anything, our sensibilities and inner sense both recognize the experience and it is reported to the mind. Kant provided us with a way of contemplating pure reason without losing its elusive status. Kant says we cannot know pure reason in and of itself but through experience of fine art, beauty and the sublime. And we come to have a sense of what it is through our faculty of aesthetic judgment. I agree with Schelling's view, the critique of judgment where, quote, the depth of his meaning and insight, which seems almost unfathomable, in a manner which appears possible only in a genius who, rushing ahead of himself, as it were, can descend the steps from the highest point, whereas others can only ascend step by step. Schelling, 1795. In conclusion, this paper has critically evaluated how fine art contains a determination that arranges itself in accordance to the purposiveness of nature in Immanuel Kant's philosophy. In order to show this within the complex and dynamic architectonic system of Kant's philosophy, the Critique of Pure Reason, 1781 to 87, was referred to. O'Shea, 1997, pointed out the immense gulf between the spheres of freedom and nature which Kant unifies in the Critique of Judgment, 1790. Kant achieves this by placing our aesthetic appreciation in the faculty of reflective judgment. As fine art is considered by judgment alongside that of the beautiful and sublime, a brief overview of both has been provided. Kant's theory on art and genius is based firmly on the notion of the purposiveness of nature. It is through harmonizing the faculties of imagination, soul, genius and understanding that allows nature to create the rules of fine art. Fine art, imbued with the purposiveness of nature, becomes a living phenomenon. Kant had to expand his regulative ideal to give humans back the enchantment he refused to write about in his impressive but clockwork formulation of reason in the first critique. Thanks very much for listening. This was my paper on Immanuel Kant's Fine Art is a Living Phenomenon Determined by the Purposiveness of Nature. I'd like to thank Dr. Johannes Neuenhauser for this opportunity, and I love his teachings on Kant and Heidegger, Nietzsche and all the rest. Thank you.